Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. Today I'd like to make some Halloween decor, and I'd like to make it in the primitive style. I really like the primitive style for Halloween and fall decor. When I think of primitive, I think of natural materials like wool and cotton, wood, and different metals. And I think of items that have some history and that are maybe being repurposed. I'm looking forward to making some sort of Halloween decor in the primitive style. Let's go have some fun.
My idea is to make a sort of a character with a pumpkin head, and I'm going to use a sock for the head. I didn't have a sock that was an orange color that I liked for this, so I decided to try to dye some socks with some RIT dye, and then I figured I would choose the one that came out the best. I couldn't find any orange RIT dye at the time that I was making this project, so I used a combination of yellow and red, mostly yellow with a little bit of red in the dye. I dyed according to the package instructions for sink or bucket dyeing, and this involves very, very warm water, hot water, salt, and a little bit of dish detergent. And you dissolve the dye and then mix it into that very hot water with the salt and dish detergent in it. Now I weighed my fabric, my socks, so I could get the proportions correct for the water and the salt. Then you just put your fabric in and make sure that it's well covered with the dye. Make sure that it isn't crinkling up so that there are parts where the dye isn't touching it. Then you'll just rinse your fabric out really, really thoroughly in the sink until the water runs clear. Now, when I was done, I had some socks with different ribbing, and what I decided was I liked the sock with the wider ribbing for my pumpkin head. Now, I wanted to make him some shoulders, so I just used these Tumbling Tower blocks from the Dollar Tree and some Gorilla Glue wood glue to make something that could act as shoulders. Now, what you see here is my prototype. I usually prototype my ideas to some extent before I begin working on them in earnest. And so this was just the idea was a sock, and through that I have that jute color nautical rope from the Dollar Tree, and that's sort of the stem of the pumpkin, but it runs through the sock. And then I've embroidered a bit of a face on that, and I've used some felt and a button. So I have this old button box that was my mother's, and she didn't want the buttons anymore, so she gave me the button box. And I think it's kind of fun to see the way my mother stored these buttons in this old cookie tin. She put some on wire that were similar buttons. Anyway, I picked some buttons. And I'm going to use some black embroidery floss. Finally settled on a small yellowish button. And my idea with this is to make it look like a child had created it. I do think a lot of my ideas for primitive crafts are inspired by the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, which I just loved when I was young. And Laura had a little doll you might know called Charlotte that her mother made. So I'm imagining a little pioneer girl maybe makes this doll out of things that she finds. Okay, and so she doesn't necessarily have a color that matches the button, so that's why we're using the black embroidery floss to sew the button on. And then I just took the rest of the sock after I cut off the part that I needed for the head and stuffed it in there, so we can use what we have lying around for stuffing. Now I embroidered a mouth on, and you can see sort of two examples of the mouth, because you can see the mouth on my prototype, and then you can see the mouth that I embroider on Ichabod. That's what I'm naming this character that I'm creating here. And so I just did, I think it's looks like, I want to say split stitch, but it's not. I just stitched in sort of a zigzaggy line, and then I stitched across that to make it look like a mouth was carelessly sewn on. And then I cut triangles out of black felt, and I did not want to use pins because that would be dangerous. I had used pins in the prototype because it was just a prototype. So I just stitched this on with some black thread. Now the nautical rope that I'm using for this one is the 8-foot nautical rope. Right now Dollar Tree has two different lengths. One length is longer and thinner, and the other length is less long, but the rope is thicker. And then I did fill in the rest of him with some polyfill that I had. Now I did a gathering stitch around the top of the sock so that I could just pull that tight around the little stem, the nautical rope. And then I did the same thing around the bottom, and now he has a head. Now I used the rope and tied it around the 2 blocks that I was going to use for shoulders to sort of hold those there. And I want to give him a little turtleneck. Now I have this old wool sock and it's got holes in the heels, so it's really no good to me anymore. I did buy some socks at the Dollar Tree that were black socks. It's easy to find black socks, but they had a wider ribbing and they were synthetic fabric. I really loved this old wool sock, and again, I am trying to make this a sort of a primitive craft, so I do want to use more natural materials. So I did use my old wool sock for his turtleneck. Now ultimately I didn't like what I had done with the nautical rope around the shoulders, so instead I used some jute and I tied the shoulders to the nautical rope. So I wrapped it around in a sort of an X so that it would be secure. And then I pulled his turtleneck sock on over that. And then I cut another piece of the jute rope for his arms and tied that to the whole shoulder assembly there. You can see that sort of above his shoulders, between that and the little pumpkin head. And then I pulled the turtleneck sock on and cut some little holes in that for his arms to poke out. To get the sock to fit him well as a turtleneck, I had to cut a little bit out of it, so then I just sewed it up in the back so that it was a good fit. Now he needs overalls, and I had a bunch of fabrics I was considering. Now that I'm looking at them in retrospect, I wish I had picked that brown and black plaid. The ones that are wrapped up are ones I got at the Dollar Tree. They have a lot of good options. So before I got to the pants, I did cut off some more of that sock to give him some sleeves, and I just cut sleeve shape pieces and sewed them to his turtleneck. Now, again, I wanted to make this look primitive and like a child had made it, so I used a different color thread to sew the arms, and I didn't do a nice tidy job. I just sort of sewed them on top so that you can see both pieces of fabric. Now I cut him 2 legs out of the nautical rope and just tied them to his body piece of rope with some jute twine. You can see a little bag that looks like it's taped up, and that has some beads in it that are the weighted beads that you buy when you're making a stuffed animal that you want to be able to sit, or if you were making like a draft dodger for a door and you wanted it to have some weight, you would buy these. They're little plastic beads. You could use anything. You could use little rocks. The Dollar Tree sells stones in the floral section, little tiny pebbles, that would be perfect for this if you don't have this sort of plastic bead. So you can see I just have that in a plastic bag, and then it's just wrapped up with some tape. I want the doll to be able to sit, so I'm going to be inserting that in the doll, in the body of the doll, so that it can sit upright. Now I tried a couple of different sorts of pants. The first pants that I made were of this green fabric, and I did one piece right side out and one piece inside out, and I sewed him little pants, and I just didn't like them. So then the second pair of pants is from another old sock, and that sock was the height of fashion in the 90s, and now it's going to be pants for my little guy. So I just, pulled the sock over him, and then I cut a slit up the sock for the pant legs, and then I just sewed them together. Now I used safety pins to attach more of the jute rope to the front of his pants to act as sort of the straps for overalls, and on one side I gave it a knot, and on the other side I didn't. And then I just stitched those to the sock in the back. Now, I wanted to give him something to hold, and I actually thought for a long time about what that might be. But then, returning to my pioneer child story, I decided maybe the child is afraid of the dark, and maybe they would like their doll to have a lantern. So I thought I would try to create a sort of a punched tin lantern for Ichabod. And I went to my recycle bin with the intention of getting a milk jug, because I figured I could cut something reasonable out of a milk jug and then paint it. But then I saw this soda can, and a soda can is made of aluminum, and for some reason I decided to try to use a soda can instead. So I'm wearing gloves because it's going to be sharp, and I'm using a box cutter knife, and I just sort of cut out some tin, a strip of tin from it, or aluminum, that could be the round part. I folded over the top and bottom so they wouldn't be sharp, sized it against him, and then I used the bottom of the can for the bottom of the lamp, so again, folded over the edges so that it wouldn't be sharp. I wanted it to be punched tin, so I could easily draw on it with a pencil. So I drew a circle. I didn't think I could handle a more interesting shape like a heart, but a heart probably would have been ideal. But I drew a circle, or concentric circles, and then I used a nail to push through and make those holes. I put a block of wood behind the tin. In some instances, I think I used a hammer to help me along with those holes, but it punched pretty easily. Now, to attach the body of the lantern to the bottom, I tried super glue. That did not work. E6000 did work, so that's what I would recommend. Back for a third can so that we can make the chimney. So I cut a half circle and then a little half circle on the inside of that for the hole at the top of the chimney. And then I cut slits around the bottom so that I could fold the edge of that over. And then punched some holes in the chimney and used the E6000 to glue that. I used a little bit of florist wire to make a little holder for the top of the lantern. Now, I tried painting this in different ways. I tried just a spray paint, a flat black spray paint. I tried an acrylic black paint, and I tried an acrylic black paint mixed with a little bit of baking soda. And then I took my box cutter knife and tried scratching these pieces up to see how the different paints worked. Both the acrylic paint and the acrylic paint with the baking soda in it scratched really easily, whereas the spray paint held pretty well, so I ended up spray painting the little lantern. I then did sand it a little bit to make it look a little bit more like it was old and used and smoke damaged more than painted. And I have some battery operated lights here that I can insert through the top because the chimney is attached with wire, not glue. So we can lift the chimney off a little bit and insert these lights in, and the light shines through the punched holes. I decided to sew a pocket on the front of his overalls, and again I chose a different color of embroidery floss. I'm using an orange here to sew that on. I also rolled his sleeves up and gave him a little cuff and sewed those, and then I sewed his sleeves together so that he could hold the lantern. I also sewed some patches on his knees. And here's what he looks like with the light off. And with the light on.
So what did you think of Ichabod? I had a lot of fun making him. I think that without the little lantern, that he is a sort of a family-friendly piece of decor that a child could play with because he's soft and not really that fragile. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That lets me know that you enjoy this sort of content and that I should bring more of it. If you like this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take care.